Alright guys, today we're going to be comparing Pulumi to Terraform, and we're going to spend a lot more time on Pulumi than Terraform. So let's just go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new Pulumi. I'm going to use TypeScript because why not? And Pulumi does lock its state file because it uses Terraform underneath with a passphrase. So you have to know the passphrase before you can modify the state itself. But it also has a stack that it also locks too. And you also can create a password for that. And we'll get to all of that in a little bit. Um, but let's go ahead and dive into the code itself. I'm going to have errors on my editor, specifically on ESLint, because there's no ESLint with the default configuration. So please ignore that. And I'm also not going to go ahead and not going to use AWSX, which is the native library that they made. So I'll just go ahead and comment that out entirely. So right now, as it is, it's going to go ahead and create a bucket with a random name, and I'll explain that in a second, but it's going to go ahead and create a bucket with a random name onto my account. I've already created a backend login for Pulumi to create a similar to Terraform state on a bucket that I specified. We'll get to that in a minute, but this is essentially creating a bucket in my account that I've already logged in with Pulumi CLI with a random name. Now, ideally, you like the benefit of using an actual programming language is that you don't necessarily want like you want to be able to be more flexible, right? Like it's a little less declarative and more imperative, but you want that flexibility. So this solution here is probably not the best. We would probably want the CDK type solution, which if you're familiar with CDK, then you know exactly what I'm about to do next. And if not, then, well, let's get started. I will make a video for CDK in a little bit, but that's not going to be today. So first, let's make a directory. We'll call it libs3, just sure, why not? And in this scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to take bucket, and then the scenario is, let's say that all of the buckets that the company creates must be encrypted with a KMS key. Now, the user of this may have their own KMS key or may want to create a new KMS key. And you want Pulumi and CDK actually gives us the ability to create libraries where we can option that out. Like, so say that somebody does pass a KMS key, great. We'll just take that KMS key and then we'll be done with it. And then we'll just encrypt that particular bucket that we're creating with the KMS key. But if for some reason a KMS key is not provided, we want our library to create a KMS key. And we can just go about it from there on out. You want to make sure that in the documentation that you explicitly state that the KMS key will be provided for you. And that's some of the caveats, I'll get to that in the future, of using something like this. All right, so let's go ahead and create a file in our newly created directory. We'll call it company bucket. Right, and then we're going to create two things. So for our arguments, I'll use an interface. So we can say export interface company bucket args, and we want bucket name. So they have to provide a bucket name. And then we may want KMS key ID, and that may or may not be provided. So that's going to be a optional, denoted by the question mark. And we'll just deal with that for now. So let's go ahead and create the actual class. We'll call it company bucket. And then it's going to have a constructor. And in the constructor, it's going to say, whoops, I can't. Anyway, so we'll say name. Now this name is actually going to be the logical name. So let's call it the logical ID, and it'll just be a type string. And then we also want the properties of whatever we're creating, right? So we'll call this props, similar to CDK, and that's going to be company bucket. Let's just call it args.
company bucket args. And did I do something wrong? I feel like I did something wrong. Why is this not? I cannot find. Oh, that would help. And of course, I spelled bucket wrong. There we go. Nice. All right. So now we're not extending anything else, so I don't have to do a super call, so it does the whole inheritance. And again, I apologize for the ESLint. That's going to be there. Sorry. I'm used to putting ESLint wherever I go, but this is just a small little video, so I don't have to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the imports that we see from the example, specifically these two, but let's just start with this one. And we also would want, we do want the bucket as well, but we're not going to take it right now. So let's say bucket equals ABS S3 bucket. Similarly, how they're doing it. And then this is where we can take the name, can take the logical ID. Now, typically what I do is whenever there's going to be a logical ID of something, or sorry, whenever I'm creating a class that creates multiple resources, I'll string interpolate the logical ID. So I'll say logical ID, and then hyphen bucket with the actual resource that it's creating. If there's more things to interpolate with it, like bucket 1, bucket 2, then I'll add that in here as it is. Right now, the other thing that this actually uses is that const type of bucket. That's interesting. I wasn't. Oh, I forgot the new. There we go. Now there we go. Okay, so there's the arguments that I want, right? So in the arguments, I want most of the defaults, but I want the bucket name, which is what this is. So this is the name of the actual bucket. If it's a minute, it'll give us a unique name to be coming from args.bucket name. And then KMS key ID, right? So that you can't just pass a KMS key ID. You have to do this whole thing, this server-side encryption configuration. For all you Terraform users, you'll remember this. And then you'll have to have a rule. And it's still nice having an LSP. So bucket key enabled. Whether or not to use bucket keys for KMS. And I think this is a Boolean, so we can say true or false, and apply server-side encryption by default. This has a different type. So here we can say SSE algorithm is going to be, there's only two options. I'm going to say ABS KMS and KMS master key ID. This would normally come from args.KMS key ID. Now, this is a problem because this KMS key ID can be undefined, right? Because it's optional, right? So that's a problem. Now, when it is optional, we want to when it's not provided, we actually want to create a KMS key. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's say that our let KMS ID or key ID equals something, right? It's just gonna be type string. But we will override it. That's why we're using a let instead of const. So if args.kms key ID, so if not args.kms key ID, then we're gonna go ahead and create a new KMS key ID. Equals new abs kms dot key, and we'll say logical ID KMS. And I know there's the whole thing about KMS policies, but we're not going to deal with that at the moment. We'll just work with this for the time being. We're not going to get too much into the weeds. Now, we do need to override that KMS key ID with what we've got here. So KMS key, so let's take our resource, right? Now this gives us a type output string. This doesn't work quite as easily as I would hope. We can try and get it, but this will throw an error because it's during Pulumi deployment or preview execution, this must not be called and will throw an error, right? So we can't do that. So we need to call apply. Apply basically takes the value of what we're trying to get and then calls it later. It's late. It's executed later in the order of execution. So we're going to take our ID and then we're just going to say KMS key ID equals ID. Now we are overriding our KMS key ID entirely. So down here, over here, instead of saying args.kms key ID, we can say KMS key ID. Now, there's another problem with this, is that if for some reason this isn't provided, right? If for some reason this isn't provided, then this must be args.kms key ID. And it must be a type string or undefined, which it is by default anyways. So if it's provided, great, it will use that. If it's not provided, then it will create a new KMS key and it will use that as an ID. Now, when we go back to our initial declaration here, it says bucket ID. This is an export, and we need to be able to export it. So one way we can do that is by creating a property. So we can say ID, and then we'll say type string, or sorry, output string, string. And so this is where we'll use the bucket. So this .id equals bucket.id. And that is it. Right, so now we can actually override all of this. So we'll take that out, and then we'll come back here, and we'll say import company bucket from lib/s3/company bucket. Yes, I know you can't find bucket. So let's say const bucket equals new company bucket. And then we actually have to provide args. So if you take a look at it, now it's going to say, hey, you know, there should be two arguments to be passed. One, you pass one of them, which is the logical ID, but you need to pass the other one because now the other args is not an optional. We're over here, right? The other args is an optional, denoted by the question mark. So now we go here and we have to provide these args. And if you take a look, there's just the two. We can pass in a KMS key ID if we know one. Otherwise, we can just it'll create one for us, and we definitely have to specify the bucket name. So we'll start with the bucket name. I will say that, and then we wanted to create a KMS key for us. And if we really wanted to even go beyond that, we can also say, and this can be called bucket ID, which is the same thing as a bucket name, I guess. Output string, right? Output string, yes. So property KMS key ID has no initializer. Yes, I know. And then this dot KMS key ID equals KMS key ID. Oh. Did you mean this? No, I meant that. I meant this KMS key ID. Maybe I did something wrong here. Excuse me. KMS key ID is output string. KMS key ID is type string. Cannot find KMS key ID. Did you mean this? Let's move this all the way up here. not the output string. Okay. Perhaps maybe that's not as easy as I thought. That's interesting. Why is that not as easy as I thought? Because it's an output string? Because it's an output string, I suppose. Yeah, it must be because it's an output string instead of string undefined. It's two different types. That's exactly it. So we would need to figure out a way to get it. But either way, you get the point. There are ways to get that. I'm not gonna sully this video and figuring that out, but I'm just trying to get to a point. So the reason why bucket works, to give you an explanation, is it's already type output string. So we would need to get a string and put it in as a type output string and provide that as a KMS key ID. So now if we were to test this out, let's go ahead and take that out so we don't have too many errors everywhere. So there's 1 and 1. Now let's go to code Pulumi, Pulumi preview. No, first I need to do that, and then we can do Pulumi preview. I don't know why there's a passphrase on the state, but I suppose that's actually good. So it doesn't actually do anything. And that's okay. So right now we got exactly what we wanted. When we don't provide a KMS key ID, it will actually want to create one. So let's pass in a sort of garbage KMS key ID, right? We know that one won't work. And this will pass all checks because it thinks that you actually do know that it's going to go ahead and that key does already exist, and that's exactly what's happening. That key already exists, so therefore it thinks that that key already exists even though we know it doesn't exist. So therefore it's not going to go ahead and create a KMS key for us. And so that's the benefit, is by having these sort of conditionals. Like you can do this like, oh hey, if my client, my dev, decides to provide me a KMS key ID that they want to use with company bucket, I'm not going to go ahead and create a KMS key ID for them. It will just be, I'll just use their particular KMS key ID. But if they decided not to do that, they still have to adhere to company guidelines and make sure that all the buckets are encrypted with KMS key IDs to some form. And then, so therefore, they don't accidentally create a bucket that is unencrypted with a KMS key because that's company guidelines. And so we're automatically adding a KMS key for them. And so you should absolutely make sure that you provide the proper documentations. If you use something like TypeDoc or whatnot, you can do that up here, and it can come up with that particular documentation on your editor. So, for example, if I say company bucket args, and so we want bucket name string. We just say, for example, name of the bucket must be less than 65 characters, and lowercase alpha numerical. I can't spell. Alphanumeric. That's it, right? And then the other one is KMS key ID. I keep doing colon. KMS key ID to use with bucket. Right, so this won't have any implications outside of it, but you might be able to look at it here and there. Company bucket creates a bucket with a KMS key if provided. Otherwise, creates one for you. right? And so let's take a look at that. Oh, I thought it would appear here. It seems my editor is just not working for me today. Either way, you get the idea. You use something like TypeDoc to make sure that all the documentations are there and so on. I think if I were to have it here, maybe it'll work. Hello, this is hello with a W. This is a key ID. So now if I were to look at it here, okay, my editor is just not working today. Maybe that's an ESLint thing. No, I need ESLint to provide me with that. And unlikely that's the thing. But anyways, you get my idea. You write the proper documentation, you make sure it's with TypeDoc, you get it out there, and this is how you create a conditional resource with your company guidelines. Something that Pulumi and both CDK can do. However, it's a little more difficult in Terraform, right? So if you're in Terraform, it's a little different. So let me see if I can remember how to do this. There's sure. Let's see. Let's do main.tf Terraform. How do you create the backend? I can't even remember. It's been that long. There we go. Terraform backend S3 and so on. See, this is the other thing. Like I have the tflint whatever it is installed, but not even that can help me with all of this. And so I don't quite like that if I'm being completely honest. And I'm not going to spend too much time of it in it. And what is my bucket name? I think I called it my Pulumi buckets. Pulumi backends. Pulumi backends is going to be Terraform backend. And yeah, US East one, sure. And then provider. I can't even remember how to do a provider either. Man, I am not prepared for this. Let's just do S3. That'll probably be simplest. Yeah, so we'll take this. AWS region equal 1, and then we'll take this. So like in this sort of declarative state, right? It's a little difficult. Let's see how you can. Is this the registry? No, provided AWS US one. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Okay, cool. It's a little difficult to say, hey, if if somebody provides a KMS key, then go ahead and do this KMS key ID, right? Otherwise, do something else. And you can play with variables, like say, oh, variable, it's by default something, and but like it's not a true if statement, if you know what I mean. And so that's my biggest gripe is to keep having to go away from the other normal language and then force myself to think of a way in HashiCorp language. Now it's very very good and declarative. I'm not denying that whatsoever. Maybe it's more subjective than objective. My thing is that if I can make this whole company bucket into a remote library, say in Artifactory or an S3 or GitHub packages and so on, then other engineers can go ahead and pull down Pulumi, log into the backend state, and then or create their own backend state even. And all they would have to do is go in their package.json, point to that remote library, do an npm install. It'll go ahead and pull all of that stuff, including company bucket down, and then they can just use that without having to write all this stuff. And so that's the benefit of this. And you can do the same thing with Terraform modules too. Um, But the thing with Terraform modules is that you have to know when the modules exist, and it can't be something like, say, for example, Artifactory, right? It doesn't work with npm, and you have to know and which version and all that fun stuff, which you do with package JSON as well, but it's not in a true package manager. So that's my biggest gripe. And to take a look at a condition in Terraform, right? You can just quickly Google it, and this is my other gripe. This is in a resource entirely. So var a dot is this, otherwise it's default a. And if you have this, whether it's in a resource or not, if you have this like in here, it's still not a true if condition, right? You're saying you're declaring a variable a, it's going to be empty if variable a doesn't exist. Otherwise, it's going to be if it doesn't exist, it's going to be default a. Otherwise, it's going to be whatever is variable a. And that, like, making sure that it is something is great, but checking to see if something is actually valid to me is even better. So I can be like, hey, does this exist? If it exists, then do this whole thing, create this whole resource, and then get the KMS key ID, and then provide this in this other resource. Doing that versus checking variables in HashiCorp language, that does not jive with me. And so that's my biggest comparison with Pulumi over Terraform. Now, for the state part that I had mentioned, Pulumi has this concept of logging into the state that you're going to be in, right? So if you do a Pulumi login, it gives you credentials, and I'll show you where mine are at because it doesn't really matter. You log into the backend for the current session of your Pulumi. So you can go between one Pulumi and another Pulumi directory, and if you're not logged into the right one, it can potentially mess things up. And I don't like that. And you might, so in Terraform land, you declare the backend directly in the directory, saying, oh hey, this Terraform project backend is actually here, right? So no matter what you do, no matter what directory you go to, the backend, as long as the backend is in the Terraform, or unless you're using Terraform Cloud, that's different. But as long as the backend is in the Terraform, then it's always going to go to that no matter what, right? You don't have to do Pulumi login to this backend with a CLI, Pulumi login to that backend with a CLI. That's a bit disingenuous, like in that sense. And when I say disingenuous, it means that like it's hard to know to which backend your current code is going to go, and so you have to be mindful of that. I don't like that system. I very much wish the backend was declared directly in the code, and that way I don't have to deal with it, um, rather than having it be here in my home directory's Pulumi file. I don't like that. Now you might think it's like, oh, there might be a Pulumi dev file and Pulumi YAML file, and there is, but none of these things, right? None of these things say which one's the backend. It's got an encryption, for sure. It's got an encryption, but it doesn't say where it's gonna go. It's got information about the project, all that fun stuff, but not where it's gonna go. And so that is one of my biggest gripes with Pulumi. But I do prefer it to be more so than with Terraform because I like to use actual conditions, actual logic, as long as documentation is there. And that way you can provide your libraries onto a remote library, and then it can be self-service. Like, oh, somebody wants to go ahead and create a uh, a bucket, but it needs to be company certified. How do you make sure it's company certified? Like, everybody must know all of the companies, like AWS resources or whatever resources infrastructure that they want to create, all is in this remote library and Artifactory. You can just go ahead and download that and then point to the resource that you want to create, and then all of the defaults will be there. Otherwise, you can override the defaults with whatever property it is. Anyways, that's my take on it, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.